So, started off looking at Ensnaring Bridge, trying to find a way to protect it, and I was looking at decks that were using Ensnaring Bridge in Modern, because I was just getting into the Modern format. And one of the first ones I saw was 8-Rack, which is a mono-black deck that uses really heavy discard, and then uses the Rack and Shrieking Affliction as a kill, and also kind of hides behind Ensnaring Bridge. It's good because if they have answers in their opening hand, you can strip them out with the discard. One of the problems is your opponent gets the chance to top deck pretty much the entire game. So if they happen to have anything on top of their deck, they get them out of the situation, there's not much you can do. So the idea was to try to take the best parts about 8-Rack and replace kind of the excess, in my opinion, discard with a little bit more of a controlling element and a better way to protect the Ensnaring Bridge. My name is Mike Augustine, and I'm playing Pixy Stix because they won't let me use the real name. The main cards in the deck are Ensnaring Bridge, obviously, Lantern of Insight, and Infernal Tutor, which basically goes and gets one of those two pieces. So the idea is, once you know what the top card of each player's library is, you can use various cards that mill one card at a time to determine what your opponent draws, and also use it as like a soft tutor to help determine what you're going to draw whenever you want to need it. When you're playing this deck, a lot of people will try to figure out how you're going to kill them. And you can be halfway through a match, and you've got your Ensnaring Bridge out, and your Lantern of Insight, and you're controlling everything they draw, and most people are still waiting to find out what you're going to do to kill them. And kind of the hook is, it's already there. This deck has absolutely no way to deal damage. The only thing you do is mill your opponent out one card at a time, which isn't quite as excruciating as it sounds, but it can be grindy. The way these matches usually play out is, you spend the first few turns just trying to drop down some protection and not die. Once that's happened, you're very selective with your milling. You want to make sure they're not getting anything that they need to kill a bridge or to kill you. And then when you get to the end game aspect of it, it's usually, if you've got 6 or 7 mill effects out, your opponent needs about 15 straight runners to affect anything. Sometimes you watch out because your Pyxis can exile the top card of the library. Obviously you don't want to mill things that they can flash back, for example, so you don't want to mill an Ancient Grudge, but you do want to use a Pyxis to remove the Ancient Grudge from the game that's on the top of their library. Aside from watching out for that, it's usually just a matter of finishing the game off in very quick fashion once you've got maybe 4 or 5 mill cards in play. Originally the deck started out as mono black because it's probably all you need, so we wanted to get some utility because we had a couple of slots we could play with. So starting off, it was just swamps with some Ghost Quarters. Ghost Quarter was good in the matchups where your opponent can actually top deck anything. So in like the Scape Shift matchup, there's just situations where you can't give them a land because it'll lightning bolt you, and you can't give them a non-land because it'll go get a land. So in cases like that, we needed the Ghost Quarters to get rid of things like Valakut. After the Pro Tour, there was a movement towards Leyline of Sanctity, which is an issue because we run 12 main deck discard spells. And also, one of our best millers, Codex Shredder, targets your opponent. So we ended up bringing in a second color strictly out of the board to help shore up the enchantments and artifacts we had problems with. So right now, we've got a couple of fetches in the main deck, and then out of the board we have 1 black-green shockland and 1 forest. So we can fetch those up if we need to. This way we get to keep the Ghost Quarters in the main deck for the decks we need it against. When we don't, the Ghost Quarters come out for the lands. It's a little unorthodox, I know, to bring in lands for lands out of the sideboard, and the deck's still in its infancy, so that might not be the best approach. But for now, it kind of gave us best of both worlds to be able to use the Ghost Quarters to protect against the decks we needed to, and when we wanted to, switch those out for the green base so we could bring in the artifact and enchantment hate. So this is a deck that utilizes the idea that one of your cards can handle a whole bunch of cards from your opponent. And one of the baseline ideas behind that is that if we're not running creatures, every single card in our opponent's deck that deals with or interacts with creatures becomes blank. So for example, if I'm playing against a blue-white-red control deck, and they've got Path to Exile and Supreme Verdict in their deck, before the game even starts, those are automatically dead draws. So if they have one of those in opening hand, it's like they've already mulliganed. So starting off with the creatureless base, we can already blank some number of our opponent's cards, and especially in a deck like this, where the idea is to get your opponent to draw cards they don't want, you're already starting off ahead of the curve. So starting off the game, an ideal opening is usually one of the 12 discard spells to make sure the coast is clear. dropping a Lantern, and really once you've played a discard spell and then the Lantern, you probably have perfect information for the rest of the game. You know everything in their hand, you know everything they draw. So we usually play with extensive notes, taking down everything that we've seen, so we know if they have anything in their hand we need to worry about, if we need to dig for another discard spell, or if we're clear to just make sure that the bridge is protected. The sideboard, the first thing you'll see is 1 Forest and 1 Overgrown Tomb. And as I said before, in the matchups where you don't necessarily need Ghost Quarter or you need green mana, those come in. And along with those, usually some number of the 4 Nature's Claims. Those are predominantly there to deal with Leyline of Sanctity, but they're also very good against Stony Silence, which is one of the cards that a lot of decks that have access to white have been running. That'll shut off all of your mill effects, which makes it very difficult to control what your opponent's drawing. After that, there is 1 Pithing Needle. There are 3 main deck. This is kind of a catch-all card. It's usually brought in against Planeswalkers, sometimes against Affinity, because Affinity has 0 power creatures that can attack under Ensnaring Bridge, so you need to be able to Pithing Needle, usually both the Arcbound Ravager and or the Cranial Plating. 1 Darkblast, it was kind of a last-minute addition. One of the problems is any 0 power creature that can attack under an Ensnaring Bridge and then get bigger. So it's mainly in there for Noble Hierarch and also Signal Pest. So the 3 Relic of Progenitus were ideally brought in here to combat Living End. I actually brought them in a couple of times today against Termaglyphs, but I'm not entirely sure how necessary they are, and I haven't gotten a chance to test the Living End matchup, so it's kind of up in the air still. 2 Grafdigger's Cages in the board, also 1 in the main. The 1 in the main is predominantly there as a tutor target for Storm, because you don't need a tutor for Ensnaring Bridge. And finally, the 2 Sun Droplets. The idea behind these was to combat Burn. The 1 in the main deck is to fight against a Noble Hierarch or Signal Pest, where they can get in for 1 or 2 damage under an Ensnaring Bridge. The ones after that were kind of just in there to help fight hard aggro. It's really good because as soon as you lay it, it kind of sets your life total to a specific number. And if you can lock them out with a bridge or stabilize at some point, you'll be able to gain life back up to the number that it was at when you cast the Sun Droplet. With 2 of them in play, you can actually start gaining life above that. So the best matchup is almost certainly blue-white-red control, or one of the control variants. Partly for the reason I mentioned before, they run some main deck creature hate, their clock's pretty slow, and we've got ways to kind of lock them out. Like, they run kind of heavy on lands, so it's easier to make sure that they're drawing lands by controlling what they're drawing. 5-color Zoo is one of the worst ones because things like Tribal Flames actually hit for 5. Like the control decks, the only chance they've really got is to throw 4 Lightning Bolts and 4 Lightning Helixes at your face and hope some number of them stick, because their creatures really aren't attacking under the bridge. A deck like 5-color Zoo can drop 3 1-drops in the first 2 turns, get them in under the bridge. By the time we play a bridge, they might be able to burn us out. I play it because I find it very interesting. I think it brings up some cool interactions, but for the most part, there's always concern that your opponents are going to really take it to heart. It's not a fun deck to play against. And also, you do get a good feeling when you have perfect information. There's something very satisfying about maybe playing a Lantern on turn 1, casting a discard spell targeting your opponent on turn 2, and knowing that you're going to have some control over everything they do for the rest of the game.